Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with INTERPHEX 2017, presents INTERPHEX Live.
Hi there, I'm Andrew Berg, Editorial Director of Advantage Business Media's Manufacturing Group. We're here with Tommy Fanning. He's head of Biopharmaceuticals and Food at IDA Ireland for our INTERPHEX Live video conference. To start, Tommy, could you tell us a little bit about your company and what it is that you do?
The name of the company first is IDA Ireland, which is the Irish Development Agency. We're the first, I suppose, in a European context, inward investment agency and have been around for quite some time, since the end of the 60s. So whereas many other things and innovations took place in Europe before Ireland, in the case of attracting in investment to our economy is something we really felt deeply we needed to do at an early date. So we set up what is an Invest in Ireland agency, which many other countries now have today, but didn't at the time. We've been, over the years, honing what we do into a number of key areas. So we do it for the sciences, be it life sciences, both biopharmaceuticals and medical technologies. We also then do it for the tech sector, which is both hardware and software. And most recently, we've done a lot of work with the digital media sector. So we have a large number of those in Ireland too. And then international financial services and that cross-border financial services offering in Europe. Ireland has been through the ups and downs, as you can guess, and there was a quite deep recession in Ireland. But because of that inward investment or international investment in Ireland, we've come out of that trough very quickly. So the Irish economy is now in quite a growth phase again. And in fact, in a country that's quite small, we have 200,000 people employed directly in international companies in Ireland doing international business. And that's what Ireland prides itself on. It's not international companies coming to Ireland for the small Irish market, but it's international companies coming to Ireland to use Ireland as a springboard, as a base for international business in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and in some cases, global sites as well.
Can you give us a little bit of background just on, because our conversation is moving into talking about Brexit. Give us a little background on Brexit itself and what that means in terms of the geopolitical landscape.
Okay, that's a really difficult question because a lot of it is supposition. We don't really know today. There's been lots of talk out there, and many of it just has been slogans to date from the British in terms of what it really means. It's only after March, when Theresa May actually presses that red button, which says Article 50 of the Constitution, that they'll start to think about what needs to be done specifically. If I take it back to when Brexit actually happened, as in when that vote took place, I was actually in a hotel in New York that night. And we were those 5 hours or 6 hours behind Greenwich Mean Time, which meant that we saw it happening in real time, whereas lots of people in Ireland went to bed and got up the next morning and couldn't believe what had happened. And literally that couldn't believe what had happened. Yeah. And that's the state for Ireland in particular, because if you think about Ireland as a nation, we have always been connected, umbilically in many ways connected with Britain. And in that regard, Britain is our largest trading partner. So for us, a lot of what happens in Ireland or a lot of what happens in Britain will affect the Irish economy. But what we found, again, back to this point of international investment, is that the international investors here are not just selling products into the UK market, but much, much broader afield. They're manufacturing products in Ireland that travel the globe. So from that point of view, we feel that Ireland is a lot more resilient today than it was in the past in relation to this. If you turn it on its head, and what does it mean for the British? It's a sea change. There are so many things across all sectors of industry, social life, political life in England that are going to change once this happens. And they're still coming to terms with how that will work.
Sure. What I hear from you is prevailing uncertainty. Something that happened just a day prior to our conversation, that the Supreme Court, the British Supreme Court, voted that Theresa May will need a vote from Parliament. And how is this sort of uncertainty affecting how you're planning for the next, say, 5 years?
Well, I suppose if you take the fact that Brexit took place, Ireland has been doing a lot of planning and preparation already. Mm-hmm. even at government level, we've been setting up working groups, working ahead in terms of what it means in broad for Ireland and what we can do to be ready for both the problems with it, but also more importantly, the opportunities that it creates. Mm-hmm. Because Ireland is now the only English-speaking country in the European Union. If you think about it, we're also the only English-speaking country that uses the Eurozone and the euro as its currency. So from that point of view, many of these companies that today are based in the UK, we're not saying in any way that they're going to leave the UK, but they're definitely going to need, at a minimum, a satellite operation that is in a European Union country. So from that point of view, we've been doing the preparation around that and looking at where Ireland fits in all of that. Ireland is a small nation, so we can't necessarily take all of that investment and it suddenly finishes in Ireland. But we do think that Ireland is a real option for large parts of that investment to support the infrastructure, to support the skill base that they already have in the UK by giving them that access into the European Union.
Sure. Specifically relating to the pharmaceutical industry, both in the UK and Ireland, what are some of the major impacts that'll happen that you foresee there?
Okay, let's look at what the landscape is today. And we work in, as I talked at the beginning, this idea of attracting international landscape that involves large major drug companies looking at locations for new manufacturing facilities. And in that regard, Ireland has punched well above its weight in terms of the investments we get versus, for instance, the UK even, where the UK is a much bigger economy, but where many of the manufacturing sites there are specifically they're servicing in major part just the UK market. But the piece that's more important in all of this is right now, many of the large drug companies globally are using the UK as a base for Europe in terms of the approval, license, launch of their new products. Because today the European Medicines Agency sits in the UK and many of them use that as a base. If Britain leaves the European Union, or when Britain leaves the European Union, the European Medicines Agency will also leave the European Union, or will certainly not leave the European Union, will leave the UK for another European Union location. And I can only surmise that in some cases, those same companies that have based themselves close to the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, will move also.
Sure. Specifically relating to funding of research, do you foresee this having any impact there?
Funny, only this week I was looking at some of the numbers researched or put together by the universities in the UK. And they talk about the fact that over £1 billion in funding annually comes from the European Union. They talk about the fact that almost 9,000 jobs in the university research infrastructure in the UK are funded by the European Union. And then they say that in addition, there's another 10,000 jobs in industry in the UK in the research field funded by the European Union in some way. That funding will definitely reduce over time. And therefore, it's a question of will those researchers stay? Will that research continue? Which will mean that Britain, in my view, will have to replace that funding with British funding.
All right. I want to return to that idea of uncertainty for a second. And what advice would you give professionals who are looking at this and are embroiled in that uncertainty? What advice would you give on preparing for an actual enactment of Article 50?
I think some of the companies are already at it, and we see it in other sectors as well, such as financial services. But to talk specifically about the life sciences sector, I think, as I said earlier, the companies have some very good and strong teams in the UK, some very good people. But what they're going to need to do is have a second site. So they should really be preparing the groundwork for having a second site available to them as quickly as possible, so that the transition through Brexit will be seamless for them. It's as simple as that. So it doesn't mean letting people go in the UK right now, but it does mean going through all of those, I suppose, regulatory hurdles or licensing hurdles that allow them to continue to do their business in a professional way across Europe.
Sure.
And that means looking at another location. It may be Ireland, it might be Germany, it could be France. But looking at another location that they feel works for them in terms of the future growth of their business.
Great. What kind of impact do you see Brexit having on the pharmaceutical industry in other countries, say the US?
I would think limited right now, particularly when we're talking about that population of the global drug companies. They have quite a large footprint around the world. And while they will continue to sell their products in the UK, it is a small percentage of their overall business globally. And even in a European context, it's not a very large proportion. So from that point of view, I think they're well set for the future. The real question is, how do they, in the future, handle their business in the UK? What footprint will they have in the longer term? And that's really what they're going to look at. I don't see it as being a major issue. I think it's going to be a larger issue for companies, and there are only a small number of them, that have a large footprint in the UK and a smaller footprint elsewhere.
One of the potential impacts of the Brexit is the relocation of the EMA, the European Medicines Agency. What kind of impact could that have on the climate?
Okay. I think it can have a major impact. London is a very big international city, but the EMA itself and its location in London is a very important part of the London economy, if you can call it that first. And if you look at that in a secondary phase, what happens? Britain decides to leave the European Union. Therefore, a European Union agency will move somewhere else. But it's not just the agency itself, because that's European employees and they will move with the agency. But it's all those other companies that today have based themselves close to the European Medicines Agency as they work through the clinical trials, the approval, the validation, the licensing of their products. And it's that piece. And it'll be teams of people who would be involved in such things as regulatory affairs and the licensing of their products. It might also involve some of the commercial teams. Where will they be located in the future? And I think that landscape will change. There was one very specific example where the Japanese have written an open letter saying, please don't move the European Medicines Agency. And they even said why. They said, because the majority of the Japanese companies have their European headquarters based in London. So that just tells you something, that those companies are going to have to make a decision post-Brexit as to whether they stay in London or not. Or back to my point, do they keep that good team of workers they have already and supplement that with a satellite or a second?
Sure. If that does happen, what do you see as important to ensure a seamless relocation process?
Well, the seamless relocation process for the European Medicines Agency, first of all, is hugely important for every European citizen. The European Medicines Agency has been seen and is a very professional, well-run organization today. It has got a reputation that's right up there with the FDA in the US. And in that regard, what we, the European taxpayers, need is an agency that continues to function and function in the way it's doing today. So in terms of a relocation, that has to be done in a way that doesn't affect the work of the agency. And we've already seen some reports to the effect that there is uncertainty, and uncertainty for a workforce means that there might be some labor turnover within the agency, and they don't want to see that rise. They need to be able to get the people that are working there today continue to work there tomorrow, no matter what the location is. Now, in that regard, I'll be very partisan and I'll say, well, a seamless and an easy transition for the European Medicines Agency would be Ireland, would be Dublin. Again, Dublin today is a very international, multicultural city. It has the wherewithal to support such an agency. We have a huge amount of new construction in terms of office space that would suit an agency like the European Medicines Agency to come here. And we think they can do that transition easily. It's 50 minutes on a flight. It's English speaking. We've got the infrastructure to support it. But we're not the only country looking at this. There are many others. But we think we have a strong case to make because we've got the skills, we've got the multicultural aspect, which we've had for some time in Dublin. And we think we can support the agency well. On the same basis, the agency here in Ireland is the HPRA, which is the Health Products Regulatory Authority. And they likewise have worked very closely both with EMA, but also with the MHRA in the UK. And I think having an agency like that is respected as well by EMA would be a strong calling card in terms of a new location. I think that's important.
Sure. Sure. In terms of Brexit in general, after today's vote by the Supreme Court, what are next steps? How do you see the process rolling out from here?
If you think about Brexit in its broadest sense, and there's been lots of coverage of this, it's very clear that negotiation process over what they term will be 2 years will be a difficult and arduous process. Some of the agencies, including the European Medicines Agency, have come forward to say, look, we need a decision quickly. So a decision on the location of such an agency is likely to happen in a shorter time frame, because the agency just needs, as I said earlier, that certainty. And I think that process will happen or will start very quickly. Because right now, if you think about the different countries who have suggested that European Medicines Agency would fit very well and we could be a good fit here in Ireland, we're preparing in a vacuum right now, as everybody else is around every other regulatory piece related to Brexit. So the vacuum has to be filled very quickly, I think, by Europe, by giving certainty to the workforce there that's already doing the job.
Great. Final question. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with INTERPHEX and just kind of what you're looking forward to at this year's show? INTERPHEX
for us is interesting because maybe we'll come back to where we started. Our agency works with foreign companies in the life sciences sector investing in Ireland. So we've got a very large number of manufacturing companies here. So we've lots of pharmaceutical companies and now biologics companies as well. In the last 10 years, we've seen over 10 billion in terms of capital investment in Ireland from the international companies. So from that point of view, those companies work very closely with INTERPHEX. Our clients work very closely with INTERPHEX around the sub-supply for their industry and around the technology for their industry. And they're big issues for us. So we in Ireland have been looking at the context where we've got a very large population of these companies already. 9 of the top 10 global drug companies have manufacturing operations in Ireland today. A very large number of the medical device companies also have operations here in Ireland. And what we've got as a strategy is, well, let's try and support these companies by having their sub-supply infrastructure here as well. A couple of good examples are companies like ABEC that manufacture the bioreactors. And ABEC have now set up in Ireland to support companies in Ireland, but also, back to my point, use Ireland as a springboard to support the European market as well. Other companies like Optel Vision from Canada have come here in relation to serialization, which is coming down the track for all drug companies, to support the industries here and work with the industries to make sure that they have the right technology for the future. We're also seeing that as well in terms of the industrial automation companies. We look at this issue of Industry 4.0 and where that's going. That affects both discrete products and also the process industry. And the process industry, in my case, is the biopharma industry. And again, all of those supports that we can have here within the ecosystem in Ireland is what we want to see. So on the one hand, INTERPHEX is a chance for our clients. On the other hand, INTERPHEX is an opportunity for those companies that are, I suppose, exhibiting there to consider Ireland as a location, as a springboard for international business. So that's our reason for being there.
Great. Tommy, I want to thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you around the show.
Thank you very much. Been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with INTERPHEX 2017, presents INTERPHEX Live.